thank you very much for coming over here. I'm really excited to be part of this panel and moderating the panel. I have really great folks joining me on the panel, and they have combined more than 100 years of experience in this space. So feel free to ask them the questions. Please direct all the tough questions to them, and I'll just point towards them, and let's make it more engaging. To kick off, I'm Amish Patel. I'm the Technical Head Operations at Biotherapeutics. We actually have a platform where we work with stem cells and oncolytic viruses, and we do most of our manufacturing through CDMO channels. I've been in this space for about 20 years, and I've worked with more than 20 or 30 CDMOs. We commercialize the asset using CDMOs, and I'm very glad to be moderating this. And I'm going to pass on next to Venkata. If you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Venkata Indurthi, and I serve as the Chief Scientific Officer at Aldevron. Been with the industry about 8 years. We work in plasmid DNA, mRNA, and recombinant space. Really looking forward to discussing the key challenges and the key bottlenecks that people have in the space. So really looking forward to the panel today. Thank you.
Next is Brian.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Grevin. I'm the Senior Director of Operations at Manica Biotechnology, which is a viral vector CDMO. I started my career 24 years ago working for an innovator. I've worked for multiple innovators, also CDMOs. I've worked multinationally and look forward to answering any questions and helping provide any feedback on selecting the right CDMO.
Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Tamara-Giushino. I'm the Senior Director of MSAT at Roslin CT Boston. So Roslin CT was previously Lichen. We're now Roslin CT with a site in Boston as well as a site in Edinburgh. We're cell therapy CDMO. I spearhead the tech transfers into clinical and commercial manufacturing. This is my second CDMO for cell therapy, and prior to that, I was doing some iPSC manufacturing, more on the innovation space. So nice to have this panel today.
Joseph.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joe Grasskemper, founder and principal of Pathways Pharma Consulting. We offer end-to-end CMC services and specialize in the outsourcing of development and manufacturing activities. That leads into my background. I'm an organic chemist by training, been in the industry for the better part of 15 years, working at small, medium, and large-sized companies, supporting multiple modalities, small molecule, biologics, AAV, mRNA, and non-viral gene therapies. I think I got them all. And in those roles, supporting the outsourcing thereof development and manufacturing activities. And in that role, also working in multiple assets that have been in the preclinical through the PPQ stage. Great to be here.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So to begin with, let's say I'm a small company, right? We are a small company, we're about 40 people. What is the right time for us? Like when we have all the development work done, is that the time that we start looking for the CDMO, or while we're in the research stage, should we start looking at the CDMO? Joseph, you want to kickstart with that?
Yeah, thanks, Amish. So when you want to start, you really want to start as early as you can. And I'll define what that looks like. Before I go there, what you want to avoid is going into any sort of rush situation with your CDMO. So if you don't have this properly planned out and you're just rushing and you needed the material yesterday, you're probably already going to be on the losing end of the spectrum. So the way that you want to start this, I think a good time is at candidate nomination. At candidate nomination, you should understand for your particular asset, your target product profile, which is going to then lead you into your quality target product profile, which is going to inform the specifications that you need. Additionally, at nomination, you should also have an idea, a high level, of what your regulatory and your clinical plans are going to be. What that's going to inform you, one, is what country you're going to be in, and that's going to help with your CDMO selection and logistics and considerations thereof. On the clinical plan side, that's going to tell you how much material do I need to make and by when. If you go to engage a CDMO and you don't have the answers to those questions, especially around how much and when, you're probably not going to get to a place to begin the relationship where you're going to end up both at the same position or understanding. So you really want to start as early as you can. And then as you're going through that, you'll also be able to gauge the business relationship much, much better You're going to be able to take your time, make an informed decision, and you may even be able to give yourself more optionality on the strategy, the manufacturing strategy, because you'll be able to start to understand, can I go through feasibility maybe with a couple CDMOs, or am I going to be locked into one because I don't have time and I'm rushing? So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah. Brian, you want to continue on that? Anything to add?
So if everyone came in as prepared as Joseph, it would make our lives a lot easier. I think we anticipate a lot of those unknowns to be unknowns, and we look to work collaboratively to help guide and come up with those things. I would say the flip side is if we come in with a fully developed process, it may make it a little bit more difficult developing and finding a CDMO. If you come in with the process and you're saying, this is the process I must run, these are the raw materials I must have, this is where you need to be able to manufacture it. It makes it a little bit more difficult on the CDMO side. I can't add more than what Joseph has stated.
Catherine?
Yeah, I definitely echo what both of you have said. We also, however, at Roslin have invested quite a bit on the innovation side and on the process development side as well, so that if we do have partners that are maybe smaller, have a little bit less experience in transitioning through the phases, we can support a process development transfer before we'll support a manufacturing tech transfer. And the beauty of it is it's in the same site. So I can have the MS&T team work with the process development team as well, so we avoid the double tech transfers between organizations.
Venkata, you want to add?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take a bit of an upstream view here, because that's the nature of what Aldevron does. So it really depends on whether, it's, in our example, whether it's PDN or mRNA, right? mRNA, we would like to start much, much earlier, even before candidate selection, so that you start using one process from the get-go, or if we need to do development together, right? Now, plasmid is unless and until it's a very complicated, very large plasmid, idea bearing and things like that, then there is certain amount of development. But even on the protein end of the spectrum, you would want to start as early as possible. The one additional point I would make is analytics. Process is easy sometimes, not to understate it, but analytics is very, very difficult. That is where the bottleneck is. So if you have any novel analytics, that has to be validated for GMP release. That itself is about 6 months to a year at least. So the sooner, you can start having those discussions, even though you haven't started really initiating a CDMO, it's going to be very beneficial down the road. Analytics, I think, has to be the first point of discussion, close second is processor. Don't know if you guys agree, but I think that's where the bottleneck is. So sooner, again, depending, plasmid can be a little bit later, but mRNA, candidate selection is probably the right point, but even sooner will really give a CDMO like us a lot more flexibility and to hit some of the challenging timelines that you guys have, I should say.
I'm just going to ask a quantification question here, right? Just to throw out here. So let's say I want a GMP batch made, right, at a particular point. What has been your experience with the clients who have came in the phase 1 or for the GMP manufacturing? How many typical runs you have to do before you make a GMP batch? Like I know it's all, but if you can share any of the, examples or anything that you've seen so far, like is 2 runs good and then your next run is your GMP run, or has it been like 4 or 5, or anybody can?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, sure. So you're getting ready for your GMP run. What sort of expectation can you have with your CDMO for how many batches need to occur before getting there? Okay. So basically how you would go about this is first figure out which process you're on. Are you on the CDMO's platform process, or are you on a homegrown process? That's going to be a big difference for how much due diligence you're going to have to go through from a development and optimization perspective. So that's the first piece. Secondly, I do recommend for your tox manufacturer to have that done at the CDMO, because that's going to get experience then in the process that you're on. You may even be at the same scale that you're going to be going through with your GMP manufacturer, and it's another shot on goal from an engineering perspective. So I think the tox batch is definitely one. And then depending on how that tox batch goes and depending on what the scale of your GMP batch is going to be, that's where you're going to then make an informed decision to say, do I have to have some sort of end run? Sometimes a CDMO will require that engineering run, sometimes not. It's probably going to depend on the like for likeness of that tox run manufacturer. It's also a business risk consideration for the sponsor and for the CDMO to say, do I forego the end run? Sometimes if you do that, the sponsor is going to end up taking a lot of the risk in that position. But again, it's a business risk perspective that you kind of need to weigh to see what makes the most sense.
Yeah, coming from the cell therapy side only, one of the main challenges is operator training, right? Especially on auto batches that are a one-time chance. So we definitely want to front load a little bit those training opportunities for our operators. A lot of the processes, as much as we like automated closed technologies, a lot of our processes aren't quite there yet and are very operator dependent. So I actually work closely with the BD team. I might look at them because they're sitting right there, doing an assessment up front of what I think the complexity of the transfer is, how many runs I recommend from my side, touch base with the manufacturing side as well, and see, hey, what are the new unit operations that our operators might not have seen before, and do a risk assessment-based approach as to what our recommendations are from the CDMO side, and then to piggyback on the analytics. We need material to support the analytic transfers, right? So sometimes we have auto products that maybe have a final product of 5 mils. You're not going to get very far on your methods with 5 mils of cells at the end, so we definitely have to add in some runs to make sure our analytical team is supported through the transfer.
Thank you.
So just really fast, I would say if your CDMO has a really good scale down model and they feel very comfortable with that scale down model such that they can scale up to the at scale GMP run, they've been able to show and they've been able to generate data with a very similar type of platform or process that you've been using, you can make that jump in scale with an engineering run and then move into a GMP run. It also depends upon the raw material sourcing strategy that you've used for the scale down model and toxicology. If you're changing transfection reagents, plasmids, something like that, for your GMP run, you're gonna need an engineering run just to make sure everything goes as expected. Little things like temperature changes, time changes make quite a big difference in the end result. And then again, echoing on analytical runs, for your scale down run, make sure your analytical assays are exactly the same as you expect for GMP, so that during GMP, during any certificate of in-process evaluation or C of A, there's no surprises. You've seen it all in your scale down run.
I mean, a good way to think about this is if you have the finances, of course. If your CDMO has a research grade service, it's better to utilize that right from the get-go, even before you get into engineering. You'll unlock so many things that you wouldn't have realized to begin with, and it'll not be a surprise to anybody, right? The working relationship is established at that point. I mean, I tell my team the same thing. It's someone else's baby that, you are trying to, grow it and, nurture it. So again, it really depends, to your point initially, whether it's a homegrown process versus a CDMO's platform process. But I think engineering, in my opinion, is a must. It avoids a lot of, surprises. But even before that, if we can start the work at that research phase, make some very small scale batches that should supply us more material, not only for analytical development, but also material for some of, early animal studies or however you want to look at this. So earlier the better, even here, in my opinion. So.
I'll just end with it. I think I'm coming from the sponsor side. I think we never have enough money, right? So we are never able to do a lot of runs. And one of the CDMOs that we work with, they're actually in the room right now. And I can tell you from experience, we did a tech transfer, we did the engineering run, and then we made a GMP batch. So we had to do like 2 runs before doing it. So next, what is the, CDMO is becoming a part of our business, right? Now, if you think about it, you are a small company, you are a big company, does not matter. I think at any given point, each company has worked with CDMO, right? There might be very few companies who do not work with CDMO, right? And we've also seen the benefits of working with CDMO, right? You don't have to put the cash up front, right? So you can basically prove the model, right? Basically your proof of concept that your technology is working, right? You have good clinical data. And then think about if you really want to create your own GMP, and so forth. So what should be the industry criteria in selecting the CDMO? Who can take them, on the journey because everybody wants their batch made the day they start talking with the CDMO, right? I mean, that's the reality, but it never happens, right? So what should be our industry selection criteria for a CDMO? And if I can kick off with Catherine, that would be great.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, my obvious answer would be like Rosalind, right?
Yeah.
I have to put that for BD, sorry. I think obviously is meet your team. I think too often decisions are made based on just referrals or like website looking or conferences. Come visit the site. Talking to me is great, but I'm not your hands in the back. So definitely come visit, go see who the staff are, ask about retention rate. That is one of the big criteria that's important in CDMO selection. We can train all day, but if your operators aren't staying at the company, we have a gap there. Technical expertise is also important on your cell type, especially coming from the cell therapy world. If the CDMO has only CAR T experience and you're bringing in iPSCs, it might not be a great fit. So definitely take a look at the expertise level across the cell types. We call it manufacturing, it's still not manufacturing. There's still a lot of scientific knowledge that goes into building that, so definitely look for that as well. And then obviously keep talking to us. Ask the hard questions, lots of interviews, pretend it's a job application, right? So definitely ask the difficult questions and don't shy away from them.
Yeah. Venkata?
Sure. I think the most important thing to look for is does the CDMO care, right? You can do everything else, but if the CDMO does not care, then you're in that cycle, right? Okay, we have this quality event, next quality event, and you're just going in this cycle. That's just one example. But I think technical capability should be the number one. Can the CDMO tackle if there is a problem, right? Are they ready to really, be flexible? That's the second point. And the crux, all of this is probably 50% or 40%, but the crux of it is their site, their people, like you pointed out, and their quality system. Or do they have a quality system in place, or are they establishing one? There's a huge difference. Even on the quality side, do they have expertise that can actually guide the industry, I should say? So those are the key things that I would look for, when you pick a CDMO, I should say.
Yeah, Brian, go ahead, please.
So one of the things I would look for in a CDMO is to treat your project like their project. So CDMO oftentimes get viewed as a business that is only out for profit, and that's not the intention why we chose to work in the biotech industry. Even though we work for a CDMO, we still value the fact that we're producing a rare disease, a rare therapeutic disease drug, and we're having an impact on the patient's lives. And we strive to understand, working with the client, what impact we can have as an extension of your company, of your project. And so the other area that we've been talking quite a lot about is capability. So match your project with the capability of the CDMO, not just in interviews, but look at their resumes, look at their LinkedIn profiles, make sure that they have that experience that you're looking for. That capability within the site, the manufacturing site fits your project. The capability of the process development area fits your project. So it is a job interview, it is an extension of your business. And that's one of the main reasons why we're here to help ensure that your product gets into the clinic in time.
So what I'm going to do is, I know we talked about capacity, and I know we're going to talk about the capacity and the capability, right, as a two factor.
Can I add a couple things just on the selection?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, just
Go
a
ahead.
couple things that I think we missed. So from the sponsor side, right, and for, I guess, representing gene therapy in a way here at the panel, a couple additional things that I'm looking for when leading a team through a CDMO selection. A lot of great feedback here, definitely quality systems, quality experience, how established is it, really understanding what you're about to jump into, turnover, big one, absolutely, capabilities, technical, yes, check. Other things in addition to that I'm looking for is regulatory expertise. How many different regulatory agencies have audited the facility I'm about to go into? Were there observations? If so, were there repeat observations? If there were repeat observations, why were there repeat observations? So, you really need to dig down on that side and really understand where's your product going to go. When you go through the selection of your typical RFI into the RFP and you have your front runners, you need to go through the site visit. Catherine mentioned this about meeting the team, getting on site. It's absolutely critical that you meet that team, that you understand not only just how your material is going to flow in that building, but you understand the business relationship perspective of, can I work with these people just from a personal level? It's totally subjective. There's no way to really score it. But you're going to be able to understand things go wrong in manufacturing. And if you're in these conversations and you're talking with the CDMO just about your company and about the project, you're going to be able to get a good feel, am I going to be able to work with these people? And then the final part is part of the CDMO selection, which I don't know if CDMOs are thrilled about me throwing this out there, but what I like to see is the terms and conditions and the MSA that's going to be governing the proposal that I get. I need to make sure that, so I see way too often companies will just sign the proposal, then it's like, okay, let's jump into the MSA. Wrong. You don't want to go about it that way, because as you end up doing that, you lose all your leverage, you lose a lot of leverage on a negotiation perspective for the sponsor side, because you're already locked in at that point. So you really want to get a copy of those terms and conditions, understand what the MSA is going to be that's governing your proposal, and start the negotiation at that point. You're going to find out that CDMOs are all over the place with really restrictive terms or really great terms that you really don't have to worry about negotiating too long and hard about. And that makes a big difference. So that's the other part that I would put into the selection.
No, very good point. So I think let's finish up any comments that the panel has on the capacity and the capability, and then what we can do is we can jump into the audience and ask them any questions they have up until the points that we have discussed, and then we can carry on the journey. So anybody would like to add anything from the capacity or the capability point of view?
I mean, capabilities we touched just a bit, but even from a capacity standpoint, I mean, the last 3 years were crazy for all of us, right? Everyone were fighting for the same square footage and things like that. But just because someone has a lot of, space, or capacity per se, does not mean they're technically sound. So it's very important to marry the capabilities and capacity piece the right way. It summarizes everything that you've said, or all of us have said in the last few minutes, but I think that's going to be critical.
Yeah, I think on the capacity side, you look through 2019 to 2021, you couldn't find capacity. And so it forced a lot of folks into these buy versus build scenarios, a lot of companies building when they shouldn't. And I mean, maybe out of necessity too, but that was definitely a crunch. But as a result of that, there's two things. One is the CDMOs have caught up. They've built up the capacity, which is great to see. So there's a bit of an overcapacity right now, I think, in the industry. But also from not just building out, it's also from the small companies that decided to bite the bullet, build their own facility, and underestimated maybe the overhead, maybe an asset didn't hit a milestone in their clinical trial, and now that's ready to go. Built capacity that a CDMO can scoop up. And so you're seeing that happen with a couple of companies as well. And so I think you're in a situation where there's other talks even today talking about it where, yeah, there's capacity, but you need to be able to execute. And so that leads into like the labor market. And I think the CDMOs have a good opportunity here with the economy where it's at. It's not great. And there's been a lot of layoffs, but there's a lot of great folks out there. I was laid off myself just recently. And there's a lot of great folks out there that are looking for jobs. And for a CDMO, this is a really great opportunity for them to shore up any gaps that they might have on the labor side.
Do you have any questions from the audience? Chris is here with Mike. Yeah. If you can just say your name and which organization you are affiliated with.
Sure, Jason Martin. I'm the Senior Director of Operations for Chimenox. We've heard a lot about how to select a CDMO, what to look for in a CDMO. There are many talks about that throughout this week. One of the things I haven't heard is when it's time to dump your CDMO. Aside from the blatant activities that obviously go with violating contracts and things like that, when is it time, what in your experience, if you have experience, telling a CDMO that thanks but no thanks, this just isn't working anymore?
Anybody wants to?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely when the collaboration's not there anymore is the short answer from my side. So there's going to be problems, there's going to be issues, there's going to be mistakes. If you're seeing a lack of engagement in trying to resolve the problems, I think a serious conversation is needed, whether that's at the JSC level or at the executive level. But if you're not seeing movement after that, your partner is not engaged. And I don't think that's going to be a successful relationship moving forward.
So I would just highly recommend that if you're working with the CDMO, manage the CDMO, actively manage it, have key performing indicators for the CDMO as you would for another department within your company or an employee. Budget. Are they on budget or are you getting change order after change order after change order? How many deviations do they have? Is it expected? Is it not expected? What are the root causes of those deviations? Take a look and see what they're writing for the root cause analysis and the product impact assessment. Look at their CAPAs. Are their CAPAs effective? Are they not effective? How many change controls do they have? Are you being informed? Take a look to see if what their quality metrics look like. So really have those metrics in place, going back to what Joseph is saying, have them even within the MSA so that you have visibility to them. And once you see those performance indicators start to turn in the wrong direction, then it's time to have a serious conversation with them. If they're not collaborative, if they're not willing to change for you, that's the point you start looking for someone else.
And some of the repeat errors as well, right? If they're making the same mistake over and over, that is a key, that tells that something is not right. So that's a key thing that I would look out for.
And just to add, I was at there was one point probably several years back, a CDMO actually dumped me, right? And what we had done is luckily, we were in phase 3 that time, and we had lot consistency study ongoing with that CDMO. And afterward, they said, you are too small of a revenue generating unit for us, so, and XYZ, and right? So we couldn't find much, but at least the validation lots were pending. So then we were able to pivot and go. But you can imagine if it's all done, and then I'm ready to file my BLA, right? It would be, yeah, so it was not a good time, but we learned a lot from that, and I agree with you. Like, we have to manage the CDMO also very closely, and we have to look at all these investigations and the regulatory, interactions they have had for the customers and so forth as part of it. Yeah, Tabby. Yeah.
Quick question, Tabby Hassan, City of Hope. So this is great about how you might dump the CDMO or how the CDMO might dump you, but in your engagements, both from the sponsor side and the CDMO, have there been some red flags that you could talk about, maybe some little known ideas that you didn't realize that later, retrospectively, you're like, oh, that little thing ended up being a major component of why I would or would not select a CDMO, or why a CDMO may or may not take on a sponsor?
Sure,
Yeah.
I can start with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to address this in 2 ways. The first part is to the first part of the question, which was when to dump the CDMO. So one thing that I do want to mention that wasn't mentioned yet was, as a sponsor, you need to look internally first and understand, am I a root cause of any way of the pain that we're going through right now? That's hard to do. And when you're on the external manufacturing side and you have senior leadership that's just very focused on executing for your manufacturing activities, that's a hard thing to say, and to say, hey, we need to look internally. And so during a JSC or something like that, it's actually really important for the sponsor to get 180-degree feedback and understand from them what could you do better as a sponsor. And I think just kind of offering that olive branch will kind of get you where you need to go on a better footing. And then to your question around, were there any sort of, landmines there that you may have seen that you thought could be a problem and became a problem? In my experience, a couple things that have burned me in the past. One is a high turnover rate. That's something that it's really hard to get past that. Catherine mentioned it. You could train all the folks in the world, but if they don't stick around, that's tough. And you really feel it. I think you feel it the most on the project management side. So when you're going through your due diligence with the CDMO, if your project manager is constantly changing, it's going to be hard to stay on top of all the deliverables that you need to do. There's so many different activities that are happening all at the same time that if you don't have a project manager that's locked in, you can have the best CDMO in the world, you still won't be able to execute. So that's definitely something that I would look for.
Anyone?
I can go on the other side. So from the CDMO side with sponsors, For us, there is a bit of a technical assessment that happens, right? So we have a lot of RFPs. Sometimes the process is ready, sometimes it's not. Sometimes we make recommendations of, hey, here's the process development we think needs to happen before we bring it over to manufacturing. But there are times where we're told, hey, we're doing that process development, but it never actually happens. And then we enter into those difficult conversations of deviations, and then we end up going, well, I told you so. And just, those are some of the risks that we take as a CDMO sometimes, to just kind of trust the sponsor, but making sure that there's due diligence on the side of the CDMO as well. We'll support the sponsor in doing the right steps forward to joint success, right? We both need to go along that path together.
Yeah, I would say red flags come up in two different categories: initial tech transfer for phase one, and then as part of getting ready for PPQs. And if there's not that free-flowing sharing of information, if you don't tell us, hey, we've had an issue with a certain raw material in the past, please make sure you test a lot before you use it. And then we have issues batch to batch reliability, and we find out that it's a raw material issue that you guys have seen before, but it wasn't shared. Those for us are information sharing red flags, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. So Heather Shagru, VP of Alliance Management with Manica Bio. I'm curious, from the selection criteria, do you ever have financial stability of the organization in mind? Because the landscape has changed dramatically from a competitive perspective. To your point, there's a lot of capacity that's been built out, and there's 180 facilities global for CGT. What about the financial stability? Because those companies could potentially go away. And to your point, if your CDMO fired you in phase 3, I'm sure that was fairly alarming.
Yeah.
And where do you pivot to? So how much is that part of the criteria?
Financial stability of the sponsor or of the CDMO?
Let's talk about the
Of
sponsor.
the CDMO, actually.
Okay.
Of the CDMO. I think that financial stability and performance or track record of the CDMO is very, very important. Because let's say, I mean, it's not something that you can suddenly find another CDMO day 3 and have them initiate another run. It's a lot of work, a lot of compatibility studies if you've already made a batch with them. I think that has to be, in my opinion, on par with, turnover rate and things like that. It definitely has to be a CDMO that can sustain, the program and can also withstand some of the pressures of the industry as well, I should say.
Yeah, financial stability is way up there. You need to understand the partner you're about to start work with, and I mean, how much of a business risk am I taking? So absolutely, and that goes into also evaluating the geopolitical risk of the location of the CDMO that you're planning to go to. So on the financial risk side, there are models out there that you can purchase to get like a financial stability score. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is just to have that open conversation, say, where are we at? What sort of runway do you have? And they're going to ask you the same thing as a sponsor too, because they're going to want to make sure that you're on stable footing as well. And then that's going to come in when you're talking about contract negotiation. You're going to want to pay a special attention to the section on assignment. That section on assignment allows the sponsor or the CDMO to reassign their contracts to potentially another organization, whether by acquisition or not. That's something that just to be mindful of that and see what the language is in there, and if there's anything sort of fishy, that's one part of a red flag to either look a little bit deeper on or run.
Chris.
Thank you very much. My name is Robert Salcido. I'm from Ocean Bio. I'm in Puerto Rico. Question for you is, we talked about the quality systems, regulatory, and all the other elements. What happens with the companies who are in early stage where we need speed and flexibility? What happens then when your quality systems may be too stringent to be able to support what we're trying to do? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so especially on the early side. So one of the approaches we take, especially for early phase tech transfer side, is we avoid the quality system altogether up front, up until we get to like the GMP runs. So we are, again, cell therapy. So the initial runs are training runs happen in MSMT and engineering runs happen in a clean space but are non-GMP, and we can operate under a protocol of discrepancies rather than engaging our full quality system. So that allows us to move faster, avoiding kind of the quality system. And then the benefit of the training runs in MSMT is we avoid also raw material constraints, so we can potentially operate under some RUO materials if there's special materials that take some time to get onboarded with, like supplier qualification, for example. So it gives us a little bit of flex to move the timeline. Once we're in GMP, obviously the quality system kicks in, and I'm not going to tell our quality team to work any faster.
I think, I can speak for my organization. We do have something known as a toll gating process, right? So we have to bring in the right people at the right time, right? To your point, if something is very novel and the quality system has to be flexible, it has to be flexible. If you're too stringent, then you can't get these next-gen therapies even to the market. So it's a balance, but again, it comes to your point on red flags that you raised. It's that open communication and transparency which is very, very important, right? There will be areas where we have both sides have to be flexible, but as long as that communication and transparency is there, that's how we take the projects moving forward.
Is there, from a CDMO perspective, is there something called phase appropriate quality systems? Like, do you have it? Like, of course, from a company point of view, when you're starting off like phase 1, 2, and 3, we absolutely do that, correct? But let's say also from a CDMO, you have a GMP where you're also making phase 3 material, correct? When I'm coming in with my phase 1 material, right, for instance, would you still have that phase appropriateness approach, or I have to follow the phase 3, or?
So you can design the quality systems within the same company utilizing the same electronic quality management systems to be phase appropriate. You can have phase 1, phase 2, and then you can have phase 3 in commercial that fall under the same electronic umbrella but have different criteria applied to them for assay qualification, material specification testing and release, what we consider batch records, whether it needs to be in the system electronic or it can be paper, how we treat deviations, how we treat change control. So it can be flexible, it can be phase specific. We just have to remember that it is going to be going into a human trial.
Yeah.
I would say the only thing, just to add to that, is I have seen though also with CDMOs, if you are going into a facility that's early phase all the way through to commercial, it could be flexible. But I have seen in many instances too that if you are doing early phase manufacturing in a commercial facility, maybe like the raw materials that you're bringing in are going to be held under higher scrutiny with the testing and release than what they typically would for an early phase facility. And so that's actually really important to know during your CDMO selection process of what facility you're going to be in, because your lead times are going to change potentially drastically from even just a raw material sourcing perspective if you're in a commercial facility for an early phase manufacturer. So I think that's the only thing with that.
Well, that's very good to hear. We'll ask 1 or 2 questions to the panel, then again we'll come back to the audience for the last 5 to 10 minutes. We talk about tech transfer, right? And tech transfer it's a beast in itself, correct? From both sides. So if you can explain what are the best practices for the tech transfer, but also you can break it down into 2 parts, like the process versus the analytics, that would be great. Brian, you want to start with that?
So, tech transfer. I've worked in tech transfer, doing tech transfer for many, many, many years. It doesn't matter whether you're going tech transfer from the sponsor to the CDMO or internal tech transfer. The same principles, best practices apply. Information sharing as much as possible. Setting things up such that they can be recorded and transferred without having to rely upon what someone says to you. So business processes for tech transfers are things you should be asking for if the CDMO has it set up. Do you have a process set up? Is it a business process? Can I see your process? What are your key deliverables? What are your milestones? What are your timings? What are the minimum level of documentation that you will require from us? What are the minimum level of documentation you'll provide to us? Where do I review things? Where do I approve things? How much say do I have in the selection of equipment, instruments, parameters, changing everything else? I mean, tech transfer has to be very collaborative and open, but it must be documented such that everyone and anyone can remember it. Even if you have changing team members, people understand where you left off and what document you were working on.
Yeah.
I always
Okay.
repeat myself every time someone asks me a tech transfer question, and my key statement is always it has to be a risk-based, milestone-driven approach, and define your success criteria before the tech transfer even starts. Too many times we cut corners during tech transfers, saying, "Hey, this is a problem. It's the first time we've seen it. We'll never see it again." Guess what? If you run 3 runs and it happens twice, it's going to happen again. So make sure that it's really risk-based. And make sure it's gated across the board. So we talk about process and we talk about analytics, but there's facility, there's materials, there's equipment. Make sure everything's following together. Often we take a process-centric tech transfer approach and we forget about everything else. So definitely risk-based milestone approach.
Yeah.
I think the more exotic your process, the more complicated the tech transfer becomes, right? A lot of equipment that you would have used for research is not fit for GMP, or it takes a lot more work, to plug in everything else to make it GMP compatible. So, I mean, I couldn't agree more that your notes have to be like perfect. That's where most of the bottlenecks are, right? I mean, it's just not an SOP that's being transferred. There has to be critical scientific knowledge that has, or else you're just extending your timeline. You'll be repeating some of the mistakes, apart from making new mistakes on the CDMO side. So that's one. Just to touch upon analytics as well, I think analytics is a different beast. A lot of analytics that we do for research use only is not GMP compatible. It'll be a nightmare to validate that particular method and make it GMP compatible. A lot of that, is, I mean, you could argue whether it's scientific, does it make scientifically sense, but let's assume it does for this discussion. But I think that is where, in my experience, and maybe you guys can speak as well, analytics take a lot more time to tech transfer than the process itself, and especially if you have multiple molecules. So the more information or notes, electronic lab notebooks is a boon for the industry, but even in the absence of those, the right notes being transferred, the depth at which a particular process or analytics is transferred is going to be very critical.
Joseph, you want to add anything?
A lot of great feedback here. I think the only thing I'll add, I'd love to hear in success criteria.
Yeah.
I'll add some color to the success criteria because that's something that I really believe in from a stage-gated approach. And so the way that success criteria, I like to see that work usually is, so when you mention success criteria, first off, as a sponsor, CDMO's like, what does that mean? And from a success criteria perspective, the CDMO might think, am I locked in to what I'm about to deliver on the success criteria? Does the sponsor think that they're locked in? And typically, no. Typically, going through the success criteria, you're setting yourself some milestones that you'd like to see met, like maybe a quality profile, a yield that you'd like to see. You're gonna have all that built out. You're gonna align on that with your CDMO. You're gonna execute your talks, your edge batch, and then you're gonna be able to measure quantitatively for a GMP go, no go, did I meet all the different elements of the success criteria? And if not, that's okay. The ones that you didn't meet, do we know why? If we don't know why, what sort of risk are we taking by proceeding? If we know why, what changes are we making from the edge batch? So from a risk-based approach perspective, you're already laying out the entire foundation through that success criteria in a stage-gated approach. So yeah, that's something to add.
Yeah, perfect. So, we all understand the importance of quality agreement, right? And it's, there are two sides of the camps, right? Meaning that sometimes what happens is because a company is too young and so forth, they do not have the in-depth knowledge of the quality agreement, so they bring in the consultants and so forth, and when they're negotiating with CDMO, the consultant is the lead in putting the quality agreement in place, right? Versus you might have a mature company who already have the quality systems in place, and for them it's easy to do that, right? In terms of, from a CDMO point of view also, like, are there any messages or anything that you think that when a sponsor comes to you, right, there are certain things that they have to pay attention to in the quality agreement, right? I'm asking you to speak on behalf of them, but still, like, it's very important, right? Because it's two-way relationship here, right? And we want to have a win-win situation here, right? Because if you're working with the CDMO and if a project doesn't work or you have to pull out, I mean, it's loss on both sides, right? So any tips or pointers you can give along the sides of quality agreement?
So focus on when you're allowed to go into the plant, how many people are allowed to go into the plant, where in the plant can you go. Focus on when you get notified if there's a deviation, what classification of the deviation do you get notified on, how quickly do you get notified. Look at how quickly you get notified for a change control that is affected to your process. What do they consider as your process for a change control and when to notify you? What should you be reviewing for batch records, whether you should be reviewing and approving, which batch records you should be reviewing and approving, what reference documents you should be able to look at when you review and approve the batch records. So I would look at, it's your batch, they're running your GMP product, how much visibility do you have into that? How quickly will you be able to see in-process data? How frequently will they meet with you to go through things like production titers for genome copies? How quickly will they review the in-process data for impurities? Those are the things that I would be asking for in a quality agreement.
Yeah, I think that's great. The only two things I would add is definitely around the deviations. What I've seen too is folks will be on different wavelengths for how you define a minor versus a major versus a critical. So make sure you're aligned with the CDMO for what that looks like. That's really important. And also don't negotiate the quality agreement in a silo to the MSA.
Yeah.
Too often you'll see competing priorities in both documents, and you need to understand before you even start negotiating either document, which one do you want to have be the governing document. So that'll set you off on the right foot, and make sure you have the same people at least involved in both of them if you can in some way, shape, or form.
So Brian, I think one thing you mentioned, right, how many people you have qualified the room, right, which is very important. But also, like, I know I work with 3 CDMOs, and I'm always telling my manufacturing head is like, we want to make sure there should be a man in plant, right? And we've seen sometimes like CDMOs, they're like, yeah, you can come in and, watch it being in the plant, or sometimes like we have video cameras and things installed, you can sit outside, and right? Are there any concerns from the CDMO point of view, like to have a man in plant?
I think, one of the concerns that we've had is when we have too many people, in a room, are we bringing in more contaminants in spite of all of the, equipment or safety suites that you put on, or suits that you put on. And the other the larger the CDMO becomes, there are more legal concerns, right? Okay, is there an IP? Or is there an IP leakage per se? And those are the concerns from the CDMO perspective. And in our experience, all of these can be addressed, but it's the constant request on, that we have to deal with. Hey, we'll send one person, becomes 5, becomes 10, and that's when any CDMO, we have to say, hey guys, we can only accommodate so many people. The other thing is scheduling in general, right? It's very difficult to schedule if there are only 1 week in a month, in a quarter that works for the sponsor. Then it becomes extremely difficult to schedule processes as well. So all of these can be managed, but in our experience, I mean, even you can go the video route as well, but having a real person there gives a different perspective.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I will say a positive note about person and plan. So especially with early phase tech transfer runs, we definitely appreciate a person and plant. It makes the escalation path so much smoother, right? Especially with cells, you don't want to leave them sitting around for 2 hours while you're trying to reach your counterpart on the partner side. So that's critical. One of the things that's important on the CDMO side is we will do aseptic training with our person and plants. Even if you're not fully gowning in, we still want to make sure that those procedures are followed. And also just best practices with our operators. It is stressful to be watched by 5 people while you're manipulating cells. So just being conscious that there's humans in the room as well. But those are definitely interactions and standards that are established before any interactions with partner in the clean space.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Chris.
Hi, I'm Michael. I work at Eli Lilly in gene therapy. So we've talked about red flags on both sides. What are some, I guess, green flags? Things that you think are really great in a partner for those of us who are not in, the best of situations or relationships with our CDMO. What have you seen people do to help repair relationships and get back to a really great functioning collaboration?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so
In there.
green flags, things that the CDMO is doing. I just want to repeat this question. So actions that what's that?
On either side.
On either side. Okay. Yeah. So good things to see with your CDMO when you're working with them. Potentially like when things go wrong too. So first off, if let's take a hypothetical example. You're in a situation where you're in a manufacturer, the batch fails for operator error. It's ideal if when you go through your MSA negotiation, you actually never open it up again. And you can have a business relationship that you already know that the CDMO wants to make it right. They have a way that they're going to get you right up front of the queue, and maybe like they take on the burden for the raw materials, and they already know this in the MSA, and you don't have to go, well, what does this line say? What does that line say? So if the CDMO is proactive about saying like, hey, this is how we're going to make it right. Here's the whole timeline. Here's the whole project plan. That part is a green flag on what would otherwise be a big problem. Yeah, so that's part of the green flag. I think another thing too on a green flag side. When I'm evaluating a CDMO, we talk about turnover and the audit history and all that, but it all goes along with, and we talk about it all the time. You're going to see it in panels talking about CDMO relationships, is how collaborative and transparent is the CDMO. So CDMO telling you like, hey, I've got this capacity crunch. This is going to be a tight spot for us. We're having some issues with, some employee turnover. Like those are the sorts of things that I don't want to be surprised going into a GMP go, no-go, that it's a no-go on the CDMO side for whatever reason. Like you should try to build that relationship to be transparent up front. And that's not always an easy thing to do, because sometimes the sponsor will come down so hard when the CDMO tells them some bad news that the CDMO will then kind of be like, I don't know if I'm going to tell the sponsor good news again. So a lot of those green flags happen based on the way that you build that relationship from the get-go. So I think it's one of the items that I mentioned.
I mean, on the sponsor side and taking this side of the table is transparency is what we look for. Hey, we have this process, but we can scale it, right? Whenever a conversation starts that way, at the end of the day, both of us are in a much better place. We are prepared for it. This is a scientific example, but a very simple example, like, hey, that's a very novel raw material. Only 2 companies in the world make or something like that. I think this really sets us up that, okay, they're telling us the truth, now how do we fix their problem and make it our problem, and then together, we can solve it. So I think that communication piece is very important on both sides of the spectrum. Project management, you brought it up, Joseph, is very critical. Am I working with the right person? Is that person equally invested in the program as our founders? Right? That's a good way of summarizing this. So I think those are the key things with that green flags in my opinion. Even though sometimes they may not be technically ready, they might say, hey, we'll have that process next year. That is also a good green flag if they're at least giving you a very honest opinion. So.
Yeah, I'd add to that a little bit. So we started saying, I don't think I've seen a partner without a financial milestone or some sort of clinical or commercial milestone, and the timelines are really tight. So transparency on the sponsor side with the CDMO side as to what is driving the timeline. It's also a lot easier to go to the operative on the floor, for example, and say, hey, we're aiming for an IND submission in 2 months. This is why we're asking for you to turn around, work this holiday, get us to the finish line. It's hard for a CDMO to be engaged in your product and engaged in your process if we don't know the why. So that's a big one for the CDMO side.
Yeah, so Joseph explained some of the criteria that you should be prepared to come to the CDMO with. However, if you don't know all those things, a green flag is the CDMO is actively asking you, how much material do you need? And if you don't know the answer, they'll help you by saying, this batch will produce this amount. we're going to take a certain amount of stability samples, we're going to take a certain amount of characterization samples, you're going to need a little bit more material. And so before you get to that batch, that green flag is them working collaboratively with you to help you define your CMC strategy.
Thank you. Chris.
Hi, thanks for the feedback. Ken Green, Vertex. What we've really struggled with, especially with CDMOs, is thinking about commercial manufacturing. And obviously there's relatively few commercial cell and gene therapy products. From a clinical CDMO perspective, how do you kind of bridge that gap between clinical and commercial in terms of understanding the capabilities?
That's a very good question. I think we intend to cover it, but we did not. You want to take a stab?
Yeah, I think most of the CDMOs are set up for clinical manufacturing, but not commercial manufacturing. That's my take. A lot of CDMOs are making that leap, but they are limited by scale, by their facilities as well, because most of the CDMOs is a multi-product facility, right? So we built our facilities in such a way that you can only scale so much. I think both clinical and commercial manufacturing are two separate beasts, in my opinion. Most of the sponsors have a clear plan, in at least I would say in most of the instances that we've seen, to internalize manufacturing when they go to commercial. But that's not true always. So you should have a clear path. The sooner you can discuss that with your CDMO right from the get-go is going to be very helpful. Hey guys, 5 years down the line, do you have a plan to scale beyond this? Are you building multiple plans? Are you, how does your quality system scale up for commercial and from a regulatory standpoint as well? So I think these are very key questions that have to be asked right from the get-go. Not every CDMO is set up to take you all the way to commercial. Quite a few are, but that's my take on this.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add too, on the PPQ side, coming from other modalities, so I started out in small molecule, I've been part of 3 PPQs through my time there. And what I would look for in the gene therapy side or advanced therapy when I'm working with the CDMO, yeah, this is all new, uncharted territory for a lot of them. But are you with an organization that has gone through PPQ before with another modality? A lot of the concepts from a regulatory perspective with your PPQ protocols, how you're going to execute it, the process characterization that you're going to have to go through. If they already have a foundation, they've done this successfully for a biologic, or even for a small molecule, or for something along those sides, that's something that you're going to be able to lean into with the CDMO to go through a thought partnering exercise to say, how are we going to do that for our product? If you're not able to do that and you're with a brand new CDMO that hasn't gone into the commercial side, that's still okay if they have the right experience on their leadership team, if they've got the right build out with their facility and it matches with what you're doing. But there's business risk with that in being the first at a CDMO who hasn't gone through that sort of PPQ exercise.
And I'd like to end by saying this. I mean, we saw in the morning the presentation from ARM. There's only about 32 commercial products in the cell and gene therapy space, right? And there are about 1,500 to 1,700 clinical trials ongoing, right? So we all realize that the CDMOs are also working hand in hand with the sponsor to figure out the path forward, how we're going to commercialize it. I think it's a long road ahead, but I think we are on the right track. And we'd like to end this. We are running out of time, but if you need to talk with any of the experts on the panel, they have a booth, so please go and visit them at the booth, or you'll be seeing them around for next 2 days. And thank you very much for this, and thank you panel for the expertise you shared.